I never thought a simple home improvement decision would turn into a legal nightmare that would dominate my life for 6 months. But that's exactly what happened when I installed heat tape on my roof last November. My name is Derek Olson, and I'd lived in the Meadowbrook Estates community in Rochester, Minnesota, for 3 years when this whole mess started. The subdivision was one of those planned communities with perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and enough rules to fill a small novel. I knew what I was getting into when I bought the house, or at least I thought I did. The winter of 2024 had been brutal. Ice dams formed on my roof after every snowstorm, causing water to back up under the shingles and leak into my attic. I'd already spent $2,000 on water damage repairs, and my insurance company was starting to give me pointed warnings about future claims. That's when my insurance adjuster, a guy named Phil Morrison who'd been in the business for 20 years, suggested I install heat tape along the roof edges and gutters. "It's the best preventative measure you can take," Phil told me during his inspection of the latest water damage in my guest bedroom. "Heat tape keeps the ice from building up. Trust me, Derek, this will save you thousands in the long run. Your premiums might even go down if you can show us you've taken steps to prevent future damage." I trusted Phil. He seemed like a straight shooter, and the recommendation made sense. So I hired a licensed contractor named Tom Jenkins who specialized in winter weatherproofing. Tom installed professional-grade heat tape along all my roof edges, in the gutters, and down the downspouts. The whole job cost me $1,500, but it came with a 5-year warranty and had been done according to manufacturer specifications. The heat tape worked beautifully. Through December and into January, we got hammered with snow, but my roof stayed clear at the edges. No ice dams formed. No water leaks. I was thrilled and actually felt pretty smart about the whole thing. Then I got the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in mid-January, in one of those official-looking envelopes that immediately makes your stomach drop. The return address read, Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, in crisp professional lettering. Inside was a violation notice signed by Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president. "Dear Mr. Olson," it began, "it has come to our attention that you have installed unauthorized exterior modifications to your property without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Specifically, you have installed visible electrical heating elements on your roof and gutters. This installation violates Section 4.7 of the Meadowbrook Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, which states that all exterior modifications must receive written approval before installation. You are hereby fined $500 for this violation. Additionally, you must remove the unauthorized installation within 30 days or face additional fines of $100 per day. Please remit payment and provide proof of removal by February 15, 2025. I read the letter 3 times, certain I must be misunderstanding something. Heat tape. That was a safety measure, not a decoration. I'd seen at least 5 other houses in the neighborhood with heat tape visible on their roofs. How was this a violation? I immediately called the HOA office and got their answering machine. I left a detailed message explaining that the heat tape was a safety measure recommended by my insurance company, and that I'd be happy to discuss the matter at their earliest convenience. 2 days passed with no response. The silence was maddening. I drove around the neighborhood and took photos of other houses with heat tape. The Hendersons 2 streets over had it. So did the Patels and the Johnsons. Even Mrs. Chen, who lived right across from Patricia Whitmore herself, had heat tape clearly visible on her south-facing roof edge. On Friday, I decided to go to the HOA office in person. It was located in the community center building near the neighborhood pool. When I walked in, a young woman at the desk looked up with a practiced smile. "I need to speak with Patricia Whitmore," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I received a violation notice that I believe is in error. I need to discuss it with her directly." The receptionist's smile dimmed slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore only meets with residents by appointment. I can schedule you for next Thursday at 3. "Next Thursday? That's a week away. This is time sensitive." "I'm sorry, but that's the earliest availability." I was about to argue when a door behind the receptionist opened and a woman in her mid-50s emerged. She had that particular helmet of blonde hair that seemed to defy both gravity and good sense, and she wore a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her eyes fixed on me with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "I'm Patricia Whitmore." "Is there a problem?" I introduced myself and explained about the heat tape, the insurance recommendation, and my confusion about the fine. Patricia's expression never changed. "The rules are quite clear, Mr. Olson. All exterior modifications require pre-approval. No exceptions." "But it's a safety measure. My insurance company specifically recommended it to prevent damage." "That's between you and your insurance company. Our community has standards to maintain. The heat tape is visible from the street and is aesthetically unpleasing." With all due respect, at least 5 other houses in this neighborhood have heat tape. Why am I being singled out? Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm not aware of other violations, but if you'd like to provide addresses, we'll investigate those as well. However, other people's violations don't excuse your own." "I'm not trying to excuse anything. I'm trying to understand why a safety measure that prevents thousands of dollars in damage is considered a violation. This doesn't make sense." "Mr. Olson, I don't appreciate your tone. The rules exist for a reason. This community is one of the most desirable in Rochester because we maintain high standards. If we allowed everyone to just install whatever they wanted without approval, property values would plummet." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Okay, let me apply for retroactive approval then. What do I need to do?" "You can submit an application to the Architectural Review Committee, but there's a fee of $250 and the review process takes 60 days. 60 days. The notice says I have 30 days to remove it or face daily fines." "That's correct. So I'm supposed to pay a $250 application fee, wait 60 days for approval that may not even come, and still pay daily fines while I wait." "The daily fines would apply if you haven't removed the installation by the deadline. If you choose to keep it installed while awaiting a decision, that's your choice, but the fines would still accrue." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is insane. "You're essentially guaranteeing I'll have to pay thousands in fines no matter what I do." Patricia's voice took on a sharp edge. "Mr. Olson, I suggest you watch your language. The board doesn't take kindly to residents who refuse to follow clearly established rules. We have legal authority to place liens on properties for unpaid fines. I'd hate to see this escalate further." The threat was clear. I left the office feeling like I'd just been mugged in broad daylight. That weekend, I did my research. I read through the entire CC&R document, all 73 pages of it. Section 4.7 did indeed require approval for exterior modifications, but the examples given were things like additions, fences, outdoor structures, and paint colors. There was no mention of safety equipment or temporary installations. I also called Phil Morrison, my insurance adjuster. "Derek, I've been doing this for 20 years, Phil said when I explained the situation. "I've never heard of an HOA fining someone for heat tape. That's like fining someone for having a fire extinguisher. It's loss prevention equipment. In fact, we specifically recommend it in our policies. I've got your recommendation in writing in your file. The heat tape installation is noted as a positive risk mitigation measure. Can you write me a letter stating that? Absolutely. I'll email it to you today. And Derek, don't remove that heat tape. You remove it and you're back to square one with ice dam problems. Next time you file a claim for water damage, the underwriters are going to see that you had a solution installed and then removed it. That could be grounds for claim denial. The letter from Phil arrived that afternoon. It was detailed and professional, explaining that heat tape was standard recommended equipment for preventing ice dam damage in northern climates, that my installation met all safety codes and insurance requirements, and that removing it would increase my risk profile and potentially affect future coverage. Armed with this letter, I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. According to the community calendar, meetings were held on the last Tuesday of each month and were open to all residents. The meeting was held in the community center's conference room. About 20 residents were there, scattered across several rows of folding chairs. The board sat at a long table at the front. Patricia Whitmore in the center, flanked by 4 other board members whose names were displayed on small placards. There was Gerald Foster, the treasurer, Linda Martinez, the secretary, Robert Chen, a general board member, and Denise Keller, another general board member. I sat through 40 minutes of mind-numbing discussion about pool maintenance schedules and landscaping contracts before the meeting opened up for resident comments. I was the first to raise my hand. Patricia acknowledged me with visible reluctance. "Yes, Mr. Olson." I stood and explained my situation calmly and clearly. I presented Phil's letter and explained that the heat tape was a safety measure, not a cosmetic modification. I pointed out that other homes in the neighborhood had similar installations. I asked the board to reconsider the fine and approve the heat tape installation. When I finished, Patricia barely glanced at Phil's letter. "Thank you for your comments, Mr. Olson. The board will take your concerns under advisement. When can I expect a response?" "The board will discuss this in executive session and provide a response in writing." I sat down, unsatisfied but hopeful that presenting the information publicly might yield results. 3 other residents raised hands to comment. A woman named Sarah Brennan stood and said she'd received a similar violation notice for her heat tape and wanted to echo my concerns. An older gentleman named Arthur Walsh said he'd had heat tape on his roof for 2 years with no complaints and wondered why the sudden enforcement. A younger guy named Mike Russo pointed out that the CC&R section in question seemed vague and asked if the board would consider clarifying the language. Patricia's responses to all 3 were variations of "the board will take this under advisement." The meeting adjourned 15 minutes later with no concrete answers. As people filed out, Sarah Brennan approached me. She was in her early 40s, dressed in business casual, with worry lines creasing her forehead. "Thank goodness someone else is dealing with this," she said. I thought I was going crazy. I got my violation notice a week ago and it's the exact same thing. $500 fine, 30 days to remove it, or $100 a day after that. Did you have yours installed recently too, last month? After that big storm in December that caused my ceiling to collapse in the master bedroom. My insurance adjuster told me the same thing yours did, that heat tape would prevent future problems. Arthur Walsh joined us, along with Mike Russo. Arthur was probably in his 70s, with silver hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors. "I've lived here for 5 years," Arthur said, Had my heat tape up since the first winter. Never heard a peep about it until 2 weeks ago. Now suddenly it's a violation that's been there all along. Something's fishy. Did they fine you too? I asked. $750 since mine's apparently been in violation for multiple years, plus the same 30-day removal deadline. Mike shook his head. This is a shakedown. I'm an attorney and this smells like selective enforcement to me. That's actionable. You're a lawyer, I asked, feeling a spark of hope. Real estate law, mostly commercial, but I know enough about HOA regulations to recognize when something's off. Look, I got my violation notice too, even though I just installed my heat tape 3 weeks ago. But here's the thing, I documented everything. I took photos of at least a dozen houses with heat tape before I had mine installed. I've got dated photos showing those installations have been there for months, some for years. So why the sudden crackdown? Sarah asked. Mike glanced back toward the conference room where Patricia was still talking with the other board members. My guess, money. HOAs are corporations and corporations need revenue. It's January, the start of a new fiscal year. Maybe they're looking to pad the budget with violation fines. Can they do that legally? I asked. Depends. They have enforcement authority under the CC and Articus, but they can't apply rules selectively. If they're going to fine some people for heat tape but not others, that's discriminatory enforcement. And if they're doing it to generate revenue rather than to actually maintain community standards, that's potentially a breach of fiduciary duty. Arthur crossed his arms. So what do we do? First, none of you pay these fines or remove your heat tape. Second, document everything. Photos, letters, emails, everything. Third, we need to find out if there are more people being targeted. And fourth, we might need to lawyer up as a group. Over the next week, word spread through the neighborhood. It turned out that Patricia's enforcement campaign was broader than we'd initially realized. 17 homeowners had received violation notices for heat tape. All of them had installed it within the past 3 months. All of them had done so on the recommendation of insurance adjusters or contractors following water damage from ice dams. We started a group chat and began comparing notes. The fines ranged from $500 to $1,000, depending on what Patricia deemed the severity of the violation. None of us had been given any warning or opportunity to seek approval before installation. The 30-day removal deadline was uniform across all notices. Mike Russo organized a meeting at his house that Saturday. 14 of the 17 affected homeowners showed up. Mike's living room was packed as we all tried to figure out our next move. I've done some digging, Mike said, standing by his fireplace while the rest of us were crammed onto couches and chairs. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA has been in financial trouble for the past 2 years. They had a major lawsuit settlement in 2023 related to poor pool maintenance that resulted in a kid getting injured. It cost them $120,000. Their reserve fund is depleted, and they've been looking for ways to increase revenue without raising dues, because raising dues requires a vote from the entire community. So they're using violation fines as a cash grab, Sarah said. Exactly. I pulled the HOA's financial statements, which they're legally required to make available to homeowners. Violation fine revenue has increased by 400% over the past year. And guess what? Most of those fines are for violations that were previously ignored. Mailbox colors, lawn ornaments, basketball hoops, that sort of thing. This is extortion, Arthur growled. It's close to it, Mike agreed. But here's where it gets interesting. I reached out to a buddy of mine who specializes in HOA law. He looked over our CC and Articus and the violation notices. He thinks we have a strong case for several reasons. 1. The CC&R language is vague about what constitutes an exterior modification requiring approval. 2. The heat tape is safety equipment, not decorative modification. 3. There's clear selective enforcement since other homes with heat tape haven't been fined. And 4. The insurance angle is huge. Forcing homeowners to remove safety equipment that's specifically recommended by insurance companies could be seen as increasing liability for the HOA itself. What's our next step? I asked. We send a formal demand letter to the board, signed by all of us, stating that we dispute the fines and requesting an emergency board meeting to address this. We give them 10 days to respond. If they don't respond or if they refuse to back down, we file a lawsuit. Won't that be expensive? Another homeowner named Kelly asked. It could be, but if we go class action, we split the costs. And if we win, the HOA would be responsible for our legal fees. Plus, we'd likely get the fines reversed and possibly even damages for the stress and time this has caused. The group voted unanimously to move forward with Mike's plan. We drafted a letter that evening, carefully worded but firm, explaining our position and demanding that the fines be rescinded and the heat tape installations be approved. The letter was sent via certified mail on Monday morning. All 17 of us signed it. Patricia's response came faster than expected. On Wednesday, just 2 days after receiving our letter, she called an emergency board meeting. The meeting notice was posted to the community website with less than the required 48 hours notice, which Mike noted was itself a violation of the HOA's bylaws. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Mike advised all of us to attend, but to remain calm and professional no matter what was said. The community center conference room was standing room only on Thursday night. All 17 of us were there, plus dozens of other residents who'd heard about the dispute and wanted to see what would happen. The local newspaper had even sent a reporter, a young woman named Jennifer Park, who'd caught wind of the story through social media. Patricia looked visibly irritated by the turnout. She called the meeting to order with sharp raps of a gavel and got straight to the point. This emergency meeting has been called to address concerns raised by certain residents regarding recent violation notices. The board has reviewed these concerns and has reached a decision. We will be offering a one-time amnesty program. Any homeowner who removes their unauthorized heat tape installation within 14 days will have their fine reduced to $100, which will be classified as an application review fee. Those who do not comply will face the full fine amount plus daily penalties, as previously stated. The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. I raised my hand and waited until Patricia grudgingly acknowledged me. Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, that's not a solution. You're still requiring us to remove safety equipment, and still charging us a fee for something that shouldn't be a violation in the first place. We have documentation from our insurance companies stating that this equipment is necessary to prevent damage, and that removing it could affect our coverage. Are you prepared to accept liability if someone removes their heat tape and then suffers water damage? Patricia's face flushed red. The board is not responsible for individual homeowners' insurance decisions. Mike stood up. Actually, that's not entirely accurate. The HOA has a duty to not create hazardous conditions or require actions that increase risk to residents. Forcing homeowners to remove protective equipment that prevents structural damage could absolutely create liability for the board. Who are you? Patricia demanded. Mike Russo. I live at 847 Pinecrest Drive and I'm also an attorney. Mrs. Whitmore. I have to inform you that the group of affected homeowners is prepared to file a class action lawsuit against the HOA if this matter isn't resolved reasonably. We believe the fines are the result of selective enforcement, that the CC&R language doesn't clearly prohibit safety equipment, and that the board is attempting to generate revenue through improper means. The room went dead quiet. Patricia stared at Mike like he'd just slapped her. "Are you threatening this board?" she asked, her voice dangerous. "I'm informing you of our intentions. We've attempted to resolve this through proper channels, but your response has been to double down on an unreasonable position. We're within our rights as homeowners to seek legal remedy." Robert Chen, one of the board members, leaned toward Patricia and whispered something. She shook her head sharply. Linda Martinez, the secretary, also tried to say something, but Patricia cut her off. "This board will not be bullied by threats of litigation. If you want to waste your money on lawyers, that's your choice. This meeting is adjourned." Patricia stood and walked out, leaving the other board members looking uncomfortable and confused. Gerald Foster, the treasurer, actually looked mortified. He approached Mike after Patricia left. "For what it's worth, I voted against these fines," Gerald said quietly. "Patricia pushed them through over my objections. The whole thing feels wrong to me." "Are you willing to state that publicly or in a deposition?" Mike asked. Gerald hesitated, then nodded. "If it comes to that, yes. This isn't what I signed up for when I joined the board." The next morning, Mike filed the lawsuit. 17 plaintiffs against the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, alleging selective enforcement, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of CC&R procedures. The suit sought to have the fines invalidated, the heat tape installations officially approved, and recovery of legal fees. Patricia responded by doubling down. She sent out a community-wide email claiming that a small group of troublemakers was attacking the board and threatening the financial stability of the entire neighborhood. She framed the lawsuit as an assault on property values and community standards. The strategy backfired spectacularly. Within 24 hours of Patricia's email, another 40 homeowners contacted Mike to express support for our lawsuit. Many of them had received other types of violation notices over the past year, fines for things like slightly overgrown bushes, trash cans visible from the street an hour past the pickup deadline, or holiday decorations left up a few days too long. A pattern emerged of aggressive, petty enforcement that seemed designed primarily to generate fine revenue. One resident, a retired accountant named George Patterson, did a deep analysis of the HOA's finances. He discovered that Patricia had approved several questionable expenses over the past year, including paying her daughter's landscaping company $30,000 for basic maintenance work that the previous company had done for half that amount. There were also charges for consulting fees paid to a company that turned out to be owned by Patricia's husband. George brought this information to Mike, who immediately amended the lawsuit to include allegations of self-dealing and financial mismanagement. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the dispute. "HOA board under fire for aggressive fines and questionable spending," read the headline. Jennifer Park had done her homework, interviewing multiple homeowners and getting quotes from HOA law experts about the unusual nature of fining homeowners for safety equipment. The story was picked up by regional news outlets and then by a couple of national websites that covered consumer issues. Within a week, our little HOA dispute in Rochester, Minnesota, was being discussed on morning talk shows and legal analysis programs. Patricia tried to control the narrative by posting defensive statements on the community website and sending out more emails, but each one just made things worse. She accused the media of bias, called the lawsuit frivolous, and suggested that people who didn't like the rules should move elsewhere. That last comment particularly enraged the community. A petition began circulating to remove Patricia and the board members who supported her. Within 3 days, it had signatures from over 60% of the homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates. The HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Feldman, apparently recognized that his clients were in serious trouble. He reached out to Mike to propose a settlement discussion. The meeting was held at a neutral location, a conference room at a local law office. Our side consisted of Mike and myself as the lead plaintiff, plus 3 other affected homeowners, Sarah, Arthur, and Kelly. The HOA was represented by Patricia, Gerald the treasurer, and Richard Feldman. Richard opened with a conciliatory tone. "Let's be clear about what we're here to accomplish. My clients want to resolve this dispute without prolonged litigation. I think we all recognize that this has gotten out of hand." "Your client created this situation," Mike said evenly. "We're here to listen to a proposal, but let's not pretend this is some unfortunate misunderstanding." The board, under Mrs. Whitmore's leadership, implemented a fine structure that appears designed to generate revenue rather than maintain community standards. Richard nodded slowly. "The board is prepared to make a comprehensive offer. First, all fines related to heat tape installations will be rescinded immediately. Second, heat tape will be explicitly approved as acceptable safety equipment in an amendment to the CC and Articus. Third, the HOA will reimburse all plaintiffs for any costs incurred in responding to the violation notices, including legal consultation fees up to $500 per household." "And what about our legal fees for the lawsuit?" Mike asked. "The HOA would pay reasonable legal fees if this settlement is accepted, capped at $15,000. I glanced at Mike. It was a significant offer, but something felt off. Mike seemed to sense it too. "What about the other homeowners who have been hit with questionable fines over the past year?" Mike asked. "The people with mailbox violations, landscape violations, all of that." Richard and Patricia exchanged looks. Patricia's jaw was tight. "The board is willing to implement a general amnesty program," Richard said. "Any fines issued in the past 12 months can be appealed through a streamlined process, and the board will review them with a more lenient standard." "That's not good enough," Sarah spoke up. "A review process still puts all the power in the board's hands. We need a blanket reversal of all fines issued in 2024, with the board agreeing to establish clear guidelines for future enforcement." Patricia couldn't stay quiet any longer. "That's absurd. We issued dozens of fines last year. Many of them were completely legitimate violations. We're not going to just reverse everything because a few people don't like following rules." "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, looking directly at her, "you turned a homeowners association into a profit center. You fined people for safety equipment, for minor infractions that had been ignored for years, and you did it to make up for financial mismanagement. That's not leadership. That's abuse of power." Patricia's face went scarlet. "How dare you accuse me of mismanagement? I've volunteered countless hours to this community. Everything I've done has been to maintain our property values and our quality of life." "Then explain the $30,000 paid to your daughter's company," I said, "or the consulting fees paid to your husband's business." Richard held up a hand. "That's a separate issue and not relevant to this particular settlement discussion." "It's absolutely relevant," Mike interjected. "It goes to the credibility and motives of the board leadership. My clients don't just want their fines reversed. They want systemic change to prevent this from happening again." The meeting went in circles for another hour. Patricia refused to budge on anything beyond the initial offer. Finally, Mike called for a recess so our side could discuss privately. In a small break room down the hall, the five of us huddled together. "What do you all think?" Mike asked. "It's not a bad offer for the heat tape issue specifically, but it doesn't address the broader problems." "I don't trust Patricia to follow through on anything," Sarah said. "Even if we get this in writing, she'll find other ways to retaliate or create problems." Arthur nodded. "The woman needs to go. That's the only real solution. The petition to remove her has enough signatures to force a special election," Kelly pointed out. "Maybe we accept the settlement for the heat tape issue, but continue pushing for her removal through the proper channels." I considered that. "What about the financial irregularities? The payments to her daughter and husband?" Mike tapped his pen against his notepad. "That's potentially criminal. Self-dealing in an HOA can be prosecuted as theft or fraud if the board president is using their position to funnel money to family members. We'd need to report it to the Minnesota Attorney General's office, and they'd have to investigate." "Let's do it," I said. "Accept the settlement for our specific issue, but file a complaint with the AG about the financial stuff, and push forward with the recall petition." The others agreed. We returned to the conference room and accepted the HOA's settlement offer, with the caveat that we reserved the right to pursue other concerns through appropriate channels. Richard drew up the settlement agreement, and we all signed it that afternoon. The fines were officially rescinded, and the HOA agreed to amend the CC and Articus to explicitly allow heat tape as safety equipment. But we weren't done with Patricia Whitmore. The next week, Mike helped me file a formal complaint with the Minnesota Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. We included George Patterson's financial analysis, copies of the payments to Patricia's relatives, and documentation of the increased violation fine revenue over the past year. Simultaneously, the recall petition was formally submitted to the HOA. Under the community's bylaws, once 60% of homeowners signed a recall petition, a special election had to be held within 30 days. Patricia tried to challenge the petition on technical grounds, claiming some signatures were invalid, but an independent review confirmed that the petition met all requirements. The special election was scheduled for March 15th. Patricia would face a yes or no vote on her removal, as would the two board members who had most consistently supported her policies, Denise Keller and Linda Martinez. Gerald Foster and Robert Chen weren't included in the recall because multiple homeowners vouched that they'd often disagreed with Patricia's approach. Patricia campaigned hard to keep her position. She sent out more emails, held a community forum to defend her record, and even went door to door talking to residents. Her message was consistent. She was being unfairly attacked for doing the tough but necessary job of maintaining community standards, but the momentum was against her. Too many people had been affected by her enforcement crusade. Too many residents were angry about the financial irregularities, and the heat tape lawsuit had exposed just how unreasonable her approach had become. Mike organized a counter-campaign, not advocating directly for Patricia's removal, but simply making sure residents had all the facts. We created a website that documented the financial issues, the aggressive fine increases, and the selective enforcement patterns. We didn't have to work very hard to convince people. The evidence spoke for itself. On March 15th, 78% of Meadowbrook Estates homeowners voted to remove Patricia Whitmore from the board. Denise Keller was also removed, while Linda Martinez survived by a narrow margin after publicly breaking with Patricia and apologizing for her role in the fine increases. Patricia's removal from the board should have been the end of the story, but the Attorney General's investigation was just getting started. In April, 2 investigators from the AG's office came to interview several homeowners, including me, about the HOA's financial practices. They requested extensive documentation from the HOA, including all financial records for the past 3 years. What they found was worse than we'd initially realized. Patricia hadn't just paid her daughter's company and her husband's business. She'd also approved payments to several other companies that were owned by friends and family members. In total, over the past 2 years, Patricia had approved approximately $90,000 in payments that appeared to be either inflated, unnecessary, or outright fraudulent. She'd hidden the payments by spreading them across different budget categories, and by having the board approve them in consent agendas where items weren't individually discussed. Gerald Foster, the treasurer, had raised concerns several times, but Patricia had bullied him into silence by threatening to rally the other board members against him. In June, the Minnesota Attorney General announced that criminal charges were being filed against Patricia Whitmore. She was charged with theft by swindle, a felony in Minnesota when the amount exceeds $35,000. She was also charged with multiple counts of fraud and misconduct by a corporate officer. The news coverage was extensive. Patricia went from being a controlling HOA president to being the face of HOA corruption. The story resonated nationally because so many people had their own HOA horror stories. Talk shows and news programs used our case as an example of what happens when HOA boards abuse their power. Patricia pleaded not guilty and claimed she'd done nothing wrong, that all the payments were legitimate and properly documented. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her daughter's landscaping company had been paid $30,000 for work that market analysis showed should have cost maybe $12,000. Her husband's consulting business had received $18,000 for services that couldn't be clearly documented. The pattern repeated with other family and friend connections. The trial was held in September. I attended several days of it, watching as prosecutors methodically dismantled Patricia's defense. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd been authorized to make those payments under her discretion as board president. But the HOA's bylaws were clear that any expenditure over $5,000 required a formal vote of the full board, not just a consent agenda approval. Gerald Foster testified about how Patricia had intimidated him and manipulated the board process. Other board members testified about their concerns. Forensic accountants explained how Patricia had structured the payments to avoid scrutiny. It took the jury less than 4 hours to convict her on all counts. In November, Patricia Whitmore was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, a total of $92,000 including interest. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Minnesota for life. The sentence felt like justice, but the whole experience had left a bitter taste. What started as a simple attempt to protect my home from water damage had turned into a months-long ordeal that exposed corruption, cost thousands in legal fees, and consumed huge amounts of time and energy. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA did emerge stronger, though. New board members were elected who focused on actually serving the community rather than enforcing rules for the sake of enforcement. The CC and Articus were amended not just to allow heat tape, but to include a comprehensive list of safety equipment that was explicitly approved without need for prior review. Fire extinguishers, security cameras, emergency generators, backup sump pumps, and similar items were all added to the pre-approved list. The board also implemented financial controls to prevent future corruption. All expenditures over $2,000 now required competitive bids and detailed documentation. The treasurer was given independent authority to flag questionable expenses, and the full financial records were made easily accessible to all homeowners through an online portal. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates didn't collapse as Patricia had predicted. If anything, they went up slightly. Turns out people liked living in a community where the HOA wasn't constantly threatening them with fines. My heat tape continued to work perfectly. Through the winters of 2025 and 2026, I didn't have a single ice dam issue. No water damage, no insurance claims, no problems. The $1,500 I'd spent on installation was probably the best money I'd ever invested in my home. Sarah Brennan, Arthur Walsh, and the others who'd been caught up in the fine dispute all kept their heat tape too. We formed something of a bond through the experience, a neighborhood group that actually liked each other and looked out for common interests. We still got together occasionally for barbecues or just to catch up. Mike Russo became the new HOA president, elected by a landslide. He brought a common-sense approach to the role, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. Under his leadership, the HOA tackled real issues like improving snow removal, upgrading the community pool, and maintaining common areas. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about standing up to unreasonable authority. When I first got that violation notice, part of me just wanted to comply, pay the fine, and avoid conflict. I'm glad I didn't. Sometimes the right thing to do is fight back, especially when the people in power are clearly wrong. The experience also taught me to read the fine print before buying into an HOA community. Those CC and Articles aren't just boilerplate legal documents. They're the rules that govern your life as a homeowner, and the people enforcing those rules matter enormously. A good HOA board can make community living pleasant. A bad one, like Patricia Whitmore, can turn it into a nightmare. I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. Despite everything that happened, I actually like the neighborhood. The houses are nice, the location is convenient, and now that we have reasonable leadership, the HOA functions as it should. Maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and handling administrative tasks without constantly looking for violations to fine. Every winter when I turn on my heat tape and watch it keep the ice dams at bay, I think about that initial violation notice and how it spiraled into such a huge ordeal. I think about Patricia Whitmore sitting in prison, probably still convinced she did nothing wrong. I think about the dozens of homeowners who got caught up in her enforcement schemes. Mostly, though, I'm grateful. Grateful for Mike's legal expertise, for Sarah and Arthur and the others who stood together, for Gerald Foster's courage in speaking truth to power, and for a legal system that ultimately held an abuser of power accountable. The heat tape is still on my roof. It's clearly visible from the street, exactly as it was when Patricia first cited me for it. But now it represents more than just protection from ice dams. It's a reminder that sometimes the right choice is the one that keeps you safe, even if someone in authority says otherwise. It's a symbol of standing up for what's reasonable and just, even when it would be easier to give in. Jennifer Park, the reporter who first covered our story, wrote a follow-up piece after Patricia's conviction. The headline was, "From Ice Dams to Prison: How One HOA President's Power Trip Led to Criminal Charges." The article went semi-viral, shared thousands of times by people with their own HOA horror stories. Jennifer interviewed me for the follow-up piece. I told her that I never wanted to become the face of HOA resistance, that I'd just been a guy trying to protect his house from water damage. But once I saw how corrupt and unreasonable the system had become, I couldn't just walk away. "Would you do it all again?" Jennifer asked me, knowing how much time and stress it would involve. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. The lawsuit, the meetings, the media attention, the trial, all of it had been exhausting. There were nights I couldn't sleep, days I was too stressed to focus on work, moments when I questioned whether it was worth it. "Yes," I finally told her, because it wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who got hit with those unfair fines. It was about stopping someone who was abusing their power and stealing from the community. Someone had to stand up to her. I'm glad it was us. The article ended with that quote. It was reprinted in a couple of HOA industry publications, and even made it into a law school textbook about homeowner rights and HOA governance. The Meadowbrook Estates community held a celebration dinner after Patricia's sentencing. It wasn't explicitly about her conviction. Officially, it was just a community renewal event, but everyone knew what it really meant. Over 100 residents showed up. Mike gave a speech about working together and maintaining perspective. Gerald Foster, who'd been elected treasurer again under the new board, talked about financial responsibility and transparency. When they asked me to say a few words, I kept it simple. I thanked everyone who'd supported the lawsuit, acknowledged that we'd all learned valuable lessons about community governance, and made a joke about heat tape being the most controversial home improvement choice I'd ever made. People laughed. It felt good to laugh about it after so much stress. As I sat at that dinner, surrounded by neighbors who'd become genuine friends through shared adversity, I realized that Patricia's assault on reasonable governance had accidentally created something positive. She'd united the community against a common enemy. She'd forced us to pay attention to how our HOA was being run. She'd taught us that we couldn't just ignore the governance of our community and hope for the best. The new board held quarterly town halls where any resident could raise concerns or suggestions. Financial statements were published monthly. Proposed rule changes were thoroughly discussed with community input before being voted on. The Architectural Review Committee, which had been a rubber stamp for Patricia's whims, now had clear guidelines and reasonable timelines. Meadowbrook Estates became, ironically, a model HOA community. We were featured in a Minnesota housing magazine as an example of good governance. The State HOA Association invited Mike to speak at their annual conference about transparency and accountability. Our community website was used as a template by other HOAs trying to improve communication with residents. All of this because Patricia Whitmore decided to fine me for heat tape. Looking back, I can see the whole chain of cause and effect. If I hadn't experienced ice dam damage, I wouldn't have installed heat tape. If Patricia hadn't been looking for revenue sources, she wouldn't have started the fine campaign. If she'd just accepted our initial pushback, none of the financial corruption would have been discovered. Each step led inexorably to the next. The insurance angle remained important throughout. Phil Morrison, my insurance adjuster, actually testified at Patricia's trial. The prosecutors wanted to establish that the heat tape fines weren't just unreasonable but potentially dangerous. Phil explained how ice dam damage works, why heat tape is recommended, and what the consequences of removing it could be. He testified that, in his professional opinion, an HOA that forced removal of preventative safety equipment could be held liable if resulting damage occurred. That testimony wasn't directly relevant to Patricia's theft and fraud charges, but it helped paint a picture of someone whose judgment was fundamentally flawed, who put her own agenda above the well-being of homeowners she was supposed to serve. My insurance premiums actually went down after all this. Phil noted in my file that I'd fought to keep proper preventative measures in place, which marked me as a lower-risk client. The insurance company sent me a letter thanking me for maintaining appropriate home protection. It was a small thing, but it felt validating. The heat tape itself became something of a neighborhood symbol. Several homeowners who didn't even need it installed it anyway, just as a statement. Others added decorative touches to make their heat tape more visible, turning it from something to hide into something to display proudly. One creative neighbor even arranged his heat tape in a pattern that spelled out "safe" when viewed from across the street. Patricia's daughter and husband both faced civil lawsuits from the HOA seeking to recover the overpayments they'd received. Both cases settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. Rumor had it that Patricia's husband divorced her shortly after her conviction. I never confirmed that, and honestly, I didn't care enough to investigate. Patricia and her family were no longer my concern. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA used the recovered funds to make long-needed improvements to the community. The playground was completely renovated. New security lighting was installed throughout the neighborhood. The walking paths were resurfaced. These were things Patricia had claimed we couldn't afford while she was funneling money to her relatives. I ran into Linda Martinez, the board secretary who'd survived the recall vote, at the grocery store about a year after Patricia's sentencing. She approached me hesitantly, clearly unsure how I'd react. "I just wanted to say again how sorry I am," Linda said. "I should have stood up to her earlier." I knew something wasn't right, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place to question the president. I appreciated her apology, and I told her so. "What matters is that you eventually did the right thing. Your testimony helped put her away." Linda nodded, looking relieved. "I'm not on the board anymore. I resigned after the recall, but I vote in every election now and I read every financial statement. I'll never again just go along with something because it seems easier than making waves." That conversation stayed with me. Linda represented a lot of what went wrong. Good people who stayed silent while someone abused power. But she also represented the possibility of learning and growing from mistakes. She'd found her courage eventually, even if it came later than it should have. As the second anniversary of the original violation notice approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. 2 years ago, I'd been an ordinary homeowner dealing with a common winter problem. Now, I was someone who'd taken on an HOA board and won, who'd helped expose corruption, who'd become an accidental advocate for homeowner rights. People still occasionally reached out to me. Someone from Arizona emailed asking for advice about fighting their HOA. A homeowner in Colorado wanted to know how we'd organized our group. A law student working on a paper about HOA governance asked if she could interview me. I helped when I could, sharing what we'd learned and encouraging others to stand up for themselves. The heat tape continued to work flawlessly. 3 winters now without a single ice dam. The investment had paid for itself many times over in prevented damage. Phil Morrison had been absolutely right about its value. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I just paid the fine and removed the heat tape. I'd have been out $500, my roof would have been vulnerable again, and Patricia would have continued her corrupt schemes unchecked. How many more homeowners would have been victimized? How much more money would have been stolen? Instead, one stubborn homeowner with heat tape on his roof had sparked a movement that cleaned up a corrupt HOA, sent a criminal to prison, and created a model for better community governance. It seemed almost absurd when I put it that way, but that's exactly what happened. The story became part of Meadowbrook Estates lore. New residents moving in were told about the heat tape incident as part of the community's history. It was usually presented with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Can you believe our HOA president went to prison over heat tape fines? Of course, it was never really about heat tape. The heat tape was just the catalyst, the thing that brought underlying problems to the surface. Patricia had been corrupt all along. The heat tape fines were just egregious enough and affected enough people simultaneously to create the unity needed to fight back. Sometimes I drove around the neighborhood at night in winter, looking at all the houses with heat tape. Little orange indicator lights glowing in the darkness, marking the edges of roofs and gutters. Each one represented a homeowner who decided to protect their property. Each one represented a small victory against unreasonable authority. My house still had the most extensive installation since I'd been dealing with the worst ice dam problems. But I didn't mind. Let it be visible. Let it be a reminder of what we'd accomplished together. The community center where we'd had those contentious board meetings eventually put up a plaque. It didn't mention Patricia by name, but it commemorated the 2025 reforms that had transformed the HOA's governance. Mike had pushed for it, arguing that communities needed to remember their history to avoid repeating mistakes. The plaque read, "In recognition of the homeowners who stood together in 2025 to demand accountability, transparency, and fairness in community governance. May we never forget that an HOA exists to serve its residents, not to rule over them." I thought that was exactly right. An HOA should be a service organization, not a power structure. It should make community life better, not worse. These weren't complicated concepts, but they required constant vigilance to maintain. Derek Olson, that's me. Just a regular guy who installed heat tape on his roof and somehow ended up changing his entire community. I still worked the same job, a quality control manager at a medical device company. I still watched football on Sundays and grilled burgers on summer evenings. The heat tape incident didn't fundamentally change who I was, but it did change how I engaged with the world. I paid more attention to local governance now, not just the HOA but city council meetings and school board decisions. I voted in every election, even the minor ones. I spoke up when I saw things that seemed wrong, instead of assuming someone else would handle it. The heat tape on my roof kept my house safe from water damage. But the fight to keep that heat tape had done something more important. It had reminded me, and a whole community, that ordinary people have power when they choose to use it. That standing up to bullies matters. That corruption can be defeated if enough people care enough to fight it. 3 years after that first violation notice, Meadowbrook Estates was a genuinely great place to live. The HOA functioned smoothly, maintaining property without harassing residents. Community events brought neighbors together in positive ways. Conflicts were handled reasonably when they arose. Property values had increased steadily, and my heat tape remained right where it belonged, keeping ice dams at bay and reminding everyone who saw it that sometimes the smallest things can spark the biggest changes. Patricia Whitmore had wanted to find me into compliance, to assert her authority and fill the HOA coffers. Instead, she'd created a movement that ended her career, exposed her crimes, and reformed an entire community. Justice served, lessons learned, and my roof stayed dry every winter. Sometimes, everything works out exactly as it should. The heat tape proved its worth in more ways than anyone could have anticipated, and I had no regrets about any of it. Not the stress, not the time, not the fight. It was all worth it to protect my home and fix a broken system.